Well, welcome and thank you for joining us today. We are excited to be presenting another webinar in our webinar series. And today, we know how impactful these financial aid staffing shortages have been on our higher education institutions.
Did we lose Jessica?
Looks like we might have.
Okay. As Jessica was saying, we understand here at Ferrilli the implications of these financial aid staffing shortages and what they mean to campus. And so we're here just to help and, in any way that we can. And so that's what Susan and Amy will be talking about today. For my checklist of things to go over, taking over for Jessica, please make sure to ask any questions in the chat window. Also, you came in on mute. Please keep your microphone muted. And we will send a link to the recording following the webinar for reference. So feel free to take notes, but just know that you'll have the recording afterwards as well. And Amy, Susan, I'll let you guys introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. My name is Amy Christen. I'm a financial aid consultant here at Ferrilli. I've been working in financial aid for over 15 years in a variety of different roles, including not just the financial aid side of things, but also cash management and student account side of things. I worked at proprietary and private not-for-profit institutions with both online physical locations and either mid to large size campus schools. And have worked in a variety of different roles, like I said. So everywhere from entry level to more of the cash management side of things, all the way up to a regional director supporting 12 different schools with a physical location in the US. So, Susan?
And I'm Susan Kannenwischer. I have worked for 27 years now in financial aid. Started at the counselor level, worked my way up into director and AVP level. I've supported student accounts and bursar and registrar's offices as well. I've worked predominantly in mid-sized private schools, but I did have a couple years in a community college and certainly can identify with a variety of challenges and needs within the financial aid offices. So I want to start here. These are quotes from a recent NASFA article. And if you saw the article, you probably felt relief that you were being heard and people knew how you felt. If you did not see the article, it clarified the realities that we all know, that the financial aid directors feel and are experiencing. 75% of the people that responded to a survey, that's a huge percentage, indicated that they are concerned about their ability to be administratively capable. That is a huge concern. Those are the things that help us sleep at night, that we know we're doing our jobs right. And 75% of you said you're concerned about your ability to do that. And more than half of the people that responded to the survey said that they feel like they can't serve their students adequately because of staffing challenges. These are things we know. As I said, we feel them. I know I struggled sleeping at night at times because I knew where I was deficient. I knew where I should improve. And yet I faced constantly the time restrictions to be able to give my compliance the necessary attention, to really dedicate the attention away from the day-to-day, just keeping up with all of the requirements, keeping up with the compliance issues, keeping up with staffing, training, all of those things. And so we're going to talk about those things today. We often limp along as financial aid directors and financial aid folks. We limp along just crossing our fingers, praying that we do not hear from the Department of Education saying your program review is just 3 weeks away, get ready. We know the auditors are going to come, and we always tuck those files away saying, oh, please don't pick that one for the audit. So we know that pain and we feel it. And so hopefully today we're going to cover some things that Amy and I have both been through that maybe will help you as you go through your day-to-day. Staffing has become a bigger challenge. It is affecting more and more people. And I know if you're anything like me, I might say that a few too many times, but if you're anything like me, you think, gosh, there has to be a better way to approach this. We cannot continue to sustain our operations when we're barely limping along. So the article proves that you are in good company if you feel that way. And we want to talk through some of the different things you can do to maybe alleviate some of your own stress and anxiety. So perhaps you were fortunate enough to be promoted from within, and you know your system, and you know your staffing, and you know what you're facing. But for me, I was hired into 2 separate schools, and I inherited systems that were not maintained well. They were not kept up. The upgrades were not necessarily used well. Our systems are designed to help support us, but sometimes they're not used appropriately. And so when you get into a director level where you're expected to make sure the system works well for you, sometimes when you step into your role, you inherit a whole lot. And you may not have the luxury of asking a million questions. Why did you build it that way? Why did you use the data like that? How did you implement the strategy the way you did? And why didn't you use these things? There's all kinds of features, at least in my experience. There were a ton of features that were not being used correctly. And so I stepped into that, and I was forced to not only learn new staff members, learn a new institution, but learn the system and figure out how to make it work better. But when you're juggling all of these things, there's often a lack of time to focus on improving the system. Your attention is spent just figuring it out. You don't often have time to step back and say, okay, how do I overhaul all of this? What I will say to you first is the systems that I have worked most closely with are from Ellucian. And so my first point of reference has always been the Ellucian Hub. There has always been, in almost every single circumstance, someone that has encountered the same situation or a similar question as you. And so if you are entering into a new school, or maybe you've been there a little while, but you've still got questions, go first to the hub. There's mountains of documentation that Ellucian has written, or whoever your software provider is, that they have provided to help in your situation. There's also, at least with Ellucian, the communities page. You can follow up, you can look at what questions have been posed. What have your peers asked? What solutions have been discovered? And so start there, start with the documentation and with what your colleagues have posted before going to IT. For me, one of the things that I feel like made me successful was really establishing a trust with the IT department. I did not go to them first. My first director position, we were short-staffed in IT. And so I knew they were being pulled, supporting the entire campus. They didn't just support financial aid, they supported the entire campus. And they don't know my data like I do. And so I built some trust with them by doing everything that was in my power to try to solve my problems first before going to them. That way, my IT team knew that if I was asking them for help, they knew and trusted that I had explored every single avenue to find a solution before going to them. Again, I know that takes time, but it helped me establish a good rapport and a good trust with that IT department. Take time during your annual setup to pick something that needs to be revamped. Again, this takes time. I know it does, but I will say that it sometimes becomes overwhelming. If you look at your system and you think holistically, like, oh my gosh, everything needs to be redone. Every single item needs to be revamped. That becomes overwhelming. And in my brain, if I can't tackle something, then it may not get tackled at all. And so break it down into priorities. So when you approach annual setup, it's a really great time to say, okay, what needs my attention most right now? Perhaps it's communications management. Perhaps it's my disbursement codes. Maybe it's preferred name, whatever that might be. Pick one really high priority. And every time you go through an annual setup, that's a really good time to say, okay, I'm already carving out time for annual setup. And I'm going to carve out just a little bit of extra time to say, reviewing every single document will be my priority this year. And so that way, in small chunks, you can establish, or you can make progress and really work through those goals in bite-sized pieces, something that's a little bit more attainable. I will also say that with systems, these systems are designed to support us. They're smart. They're not always perfect. I understand that. I've worked on multiple systems, and that seems to be a ongoing conversation at conferences, how bad the system is. But I will say that most systems really are actually extremely robust and designed to help us. But they're not perfect. And sometimes they need some customizations. I would use those sparingly, because every customization you request adds extra layers onto your IT staff. And again, going back to what I said earlier, a lot of the success that I achieved was because I developed a great relationship with my IT staff, trying really hard to work with them and minimize customizations, because I didn't want to add extra layers to their work. As I said, many IT departments support the entire campus. They don't just support the financial aid office. And for me personally, when I signaled that I respected that, and I tried really hard not to ask for customizations, it showed my IT staff that I respect their work, and it enhanced that relationship with the IT department. Dig into your system, see how you can use it better the way it was delivered from the company. And it will go a long way in helping your IT staff support you with the extra time that they may find when you're handling a lot more in-house. Currently, I'm working at Albany Medical College, and we do have an advantage when it comes to the systems. I'm serving as an interim financial aid director, and I have two other folks that are working really hard behind the scenes to help make sure the system works well. So it allows me to focus on the day-to-day, to focus on serving the students and making sure the compliance requirements are met. And meanwhile, these other two folks are helping me work really hard to make sure the rules are written correctly, that everything is documented, that it makes sense the way we're using our system. And so that's a luxury that we're certainly making sure is a priority for us in this situation with some interim staffing, which has allowed us to be successful at my current institution. The next topic we want to hit is documentation. That always seems to be the lingering thing that just doesn't quite get finished. I know I have been just as guilty as other people to say, by the time issues get to me, they're the really funky ones and they're really hard to document. Or maybe you have found yourself saying, well, things change so fast. By the time I get procedures written, they're already out of date. And I will just say that documentation is not a luxury we can put off. It has to be a priority. And as a director, it's important to set the tone and create a culture that says documentation must happen. I encourage you to carve out time. Put time on your calendar so your entire staff can see it. Make sure they know when you have closed door time to write your procedures. Maybe you're a kind of person that says, all right, things are a little bit slower in September or February or whatever that looks like for your cycle. And everyone in the office is going to dedicate time this month. I want to see it on your calendar to update your documentation for the year. Or perhaps you say, one day out of every month, I'm going to close my door and update my procedures. Again, I understand no one has time for this. 75% of the respondents, though, have said they're concerned about administrative capability. This is a big deal. So it's got to be a culture that you close your door or put time on the calendar, block off other appointments so you can focus on documentation. Make sure that it's non-negotiable. Succession planning will be far more successful. Implementing new staff, bringing them on board will be so much easier if you have the gift of documentation. If you've made sure your staff documents everything they do, then staff shortages aren't quite as worrisome because you know what your people do, because there are no gaps in knowledge. Writing down procedures should not feel like, oh my gosh, if I write down what I do, then they won't need me anymore. It's not a threat to your job. It is planning for the future, and it is setting yourself and your team up for success should someone get a great job opportunity and leave you short-staffed. Having that documentation will make sure everybody is able to be successful.
And just to add with a couple more examples, I'm working with a school right now who is facing exactly what the NASPA article is talking about. They lost a key staff member. The staff member was there for a very long time, had a lot of responsibilities within the office. One of her main responsibilities was processing staff. So before she left, in that 2-week window, she identified a backup and did some good training with that individual. Kind of alongside that training, I was there to support and providing some good documentation, documenting the setup screens for staff and, kind of outlining, here's how you process it and the step-by-step. Luckily, we were doing that because then a couple months later, the person who was, newly trained on this also left. So, having that documentation is really important. And, it doesn't have to take extra time. So, this key staff member who left was taking the time to train the next person in line. And while doing that, we're documenting as we go. So that was just one example. For my past role as a director, COVID hit. And, all of a sudden everybody has to work remotely. So that did force some staff turnover. While we were working remotely, it's like, okay, well, we still have to do this training, right? So as we were meeting over Zoom from our homes, it dawned on me, we need to be recording this. So that's what we started doing. Anytime I would meet with a staff member, and, most of the time it was like, I've got a question. Okay, stop, let's hit record, and we can train and record so that next time it comes up, you've got a recorded training. So we started a shared folder with just all of these recorded training sessions. And so that now lives on a shared drive where you can access it, whether you're in the office, whether you're remote. And it's a really nice resource, and it really empowers staff to be able to go back and, oh, I remember we did this training, but I don't remember, did I enter a yes here or a no here? And then they're able to just watch the recording, get their answer, continue processing without feeling like they have to interrupt you and ask those questions. So having that documentation and those recordings, I found to be a very valuable tool. Okay, next we're going to talk a little bit about staff training and development. We know that there is a lot to learn in financial aid. And just when you think you know it all, they change it on you, right? With all of the rules and regulations, eligibility requirements, and everything that governs financial aid, it's hard to train new staff. It takes a lot of work. Even if you hire somebody with experience from another school, there's still a lot to learn because policies and procedures are different at each school. So it is critical to retain the staff that you have. One of the things that I think is crucial to retaining your staff is to really listen to them. So I would try to make a point to talk to my staff, whether, at least at annual review time, but hopefully more than that, quarterly or something like that, set up some kind of a cadence to just have a conversation about what are you doing that you like? What are you doing that you don't like so much? What are you passionate about? Most people don't go into financial aid because they're going to make, a 6-figure salary or something like that. Usually people in financial aid go in because they're there to help people. So what is it that they're passionate about? Are they passionate about helping students, who didn't think they could go to college now realize they can go to college? Is it because maybe they were misinformed when they went to school about their financial aid and now they want to help students make better decisions? So find out what it is that drives them, what it is that they like about their job, and what it is that they're doing that is maybe tedious, time consuming, that takes them away from what they love. And so after talking to your staff and having those conversations, okay, so you're telling me that, importing ISERs, this is an example of a client that we're working with right now. We're working on automating the ISER import process for them. Importing ISERs every day, is not something you're passionate about. Who is, right? So what we're doing is taking that whole process and putting it on the process handler to run overnight so that nobody has to sit there and click those buttons every day. And so that's going to make a world of a difference. This is an office who, like many others, it was facing some staff turnover. And this is going to give, this staff member who was doing this ICER process more time back in his day to do things that really matter, more of those higher level things that, he's really good at and really knowledgeable at. And instead he's taking time to click buttons. So, think about processes like that for your office. Are there things that you can automate? And ultimately, there's going to be those tasks that nobody likes, nobody wants to do, but they still have to get done. So if you can't automate them, find ways to spread them out. Can they be done less frequently? Can they be done, can you take this piece and I'll take this piece and we'll knock it out together. So, making the workflow for your office and being smart and strategic about it, so that, everybody is using their time, the best way that's possible. All right, reporting compliance.
So when we first were putting this together and we're talking about iPads and PhysApp, I often think back to when I was first brought in as a director, and it just made me shiver. The thought of these major requirements, and in the moment, it sometimes feels like the success of the entire college is on your shoulders. And that's probably not true, but these are really important things that we do day in and day out. Again, documenting over and over, at my first school, when I was first responsible for iPads and US News and PhysApp and all of those different surveys, my first year, it was just trying to figure out, pull the pieces and parts that existed in these folders, figuring out what worked in my system and just hoping I did it right. That was many years ago, and we made it okay. Year 2, I felt a little bit more confident because I had made some notes. By year 3, I made notes on every single click on how to do that. But I'll tell you, those compliance requirements change and they're daunting. And what I think back to are my colleagues, my peers, my people, the tribe that I would call on when I didn't know how to do something in the system. Perhaps everybody else that I talked to did it a little bit differently, but I had the benefit of gleaning and getting ideas and drawing on the expertise of people that had walked the path before me. And so when I think of all of those really big, substantial requirements that sometimes just bog us down, I just think, gosh, I'm so grateful that we work in an industry where there's people around us that are willing to share their knowledge. And I drew upon those people. But as Amy had said, keep those documents in the moment. As you're submitting the PhysApp, type in what clicks you make, because next year you might do it a little differently, but at least you have a starting point. You have a place that pulls it all together. There's frustration sometimes in that these are big requirements. These programs depend on us doing our jobs correctly. And oftentimes senior leaders say, I understand, I get it, this is hard. But until you've walked in the shoes of clicking submit on a PhysApp, hoping everything is correct, or trying to get the business office to submit some data so you can get everything done by September 30th, or whatever that requirement is, it's hard to really understand exactly the stress that this does create. Keep data on how things go. We'll talk in a few minutes more about key metrics, but your administrators might not ask for this, but instead of simply going to your boss and saying, do you understand how much harder we're working? Do you get the amount of additional requirements that are coming our way? While they may be perfectly happy to listen to you vent and kind of unload a little bit, what's more effective is data. Again, all of these things take a little bit of time, but if you can document that, look, we packaged 3,000 more students this year than we did 3 years ago, that's an extra burden because we don't have extra staff. Then they might keep that in mind if there's a staffing opportunity to say, oh, we do have the budget for an additional staff member, and financial aid documented that they're packaging so many more students, or that they've spent X number of more hours on the HERF requirement, the HERF reporting. That changed this year, and it took a lot more time. So if you can document those things and just keep track, that becomes far more powerful when you're talking to your administration. What is going on your staff that's adding to the time requirements? So even if you're fully staffed, you might feel like things are much harder because there could be additional burden. And so the more you can quantify that and demonstrate that to your leadership, the better the argument for additional staff or shifting the staff responsibilities. Perhaps you are doing more for your work study program that really could be shifted into HR. Those types of things could provide some relief if you can document that to your leadership.
Yeah, and when it comes to reporting and compliance, over the years, I found that, setting up your system so that you have these checks and balances in place really can assist so that your year-end reporting isn't a nightmare. So, what kinds of things can you add to your system, or just some extra, checks that you can put in place so that your year-round processing goes more smoothly, and in turn, you don't have, a nightmare when you go to create your phys app and now you're trying to find $500 that you're off or something like that. One example of something I was able to do in my last director role was I took the time to create a master annual calendar. So I literally mapped out January through December. What are the big pieces that we're doing, and got feedback from all of my staff, my loan processor, my operations manager, everybody who had a part in the financial aid office, and mapped out what we're doing and when we're doing. And then thought about the financial aid calendar to say, okay, this is what we're currently doing. How can we make this make more sense? Because you'll often, once we put everything together, it was like, whoa, August, right? Or, oh, December, January. There's those peak times where you're just doing so much. So how can you spread that out? And, there's going to be things that have to get done at certain periods of time, right? You have to check eligibility before disbursement. You have to check enrollment at the census. So, put those in place first on your calendar, and then work around that. What are some things that you can do? One example of, we saw an issue with this, our mismatch report is what we called it. So looking at enrollment, when students would, register and we'd package them, assuming they were going to be full-time, and then all of a sudden they're now 3/4 time or they're half time. So we used to have a process where, once billing opened up, somebody would take a look at that report and every week go through and adjust the aid. And because of the way the institutional grants and scholarships were structured, a lot of that was manual. And it was like, we're changing these same students every week. 1 week they'll be full-time, next week they'll be 3/4 time, and then they'll be back up to full-time. So why are we going and doing so much back and forth for the same students? So what we decided to do is take a look at the calendar, and we worked our way backwards. So, okay, ultimately they need to have accurate financial aid and billing by X date, and let's work our way backwards. So what we did is took that date, and 2 weeks before that, final date, okay, we're going to send out an email blast to students to say, this is when, we're going to check your enrollment to see if you're full-time. And if you're not full-time, your aid will be adjusted, so that it gave students a chance to make those changes. And they were aware of when we were making those changes, so that, sometimes students couldn't register for their full 12 credits by the time we wanted them to, because there was a wait list or something like that. But they would at least know that, okay, if I'm looking at my bill, I'm not full-time yet, I'm not at 12 credits, then I know that, this won't be accurate. So, having that kind of a sense of a timeline of how can we proactively reach out rather than just reacting every time a student changes their schedule, we're going to make the adjustment. So, are there things like that in your process that have been a challenge for you that you could maybe take a step back and say, okay, what can we do to change this timeline, be proactive? Are there reports that I can run to check for different things? Are there things that I can streamline? And ultimately, the more strategic touch points you can kind of 8 throughout the year, the more smoothly your system will run, and the more you're going to be able to have an easier time with the compliance and reporting requirements. The other thing that does is if you're looking strategically, keeping your system running smoothly, it allows you and your staff more time to focus on students. So again, what's everybody passionate about? Usually it's students, right? So keeping your system running smoothly will allow you to have more of your time, instead of being bogged down by the details and being reactionary, taking that time with students. Being able to communicate with students proactively. I can think of an example where we were finding that students just weren't completing the requirements, and we would send them a really long, detailed email with all of the things that they needed to do, which we were like, this is great. This answers every question they could ever have. And then we get an email back from the student saying, great, what do I need to do? And while it was, kind of one of those things where it's like, well, read the email. There was something in that communication that wasn't getting through, right? So we took a look at our communication and said, okay, we need to do this better. How do we do it better? So we took a focus group with a mix of students. So we had, traditional age students, non-traditional age students. We were a Hispanic serving institution, so we wanted to make sure we, had representation from different, racial and ethnic groups as well. So we had this focus group, lured everybody in with pizza, and asked them, what are you currently getting from the financial aid communication? We asked about our website. We asked about emails. How do you like to be communicated with? Should we call you? Should we text you? And so we got some feedback. And the biggest thing that I learned from that session, especially for our traditional age students, was this is the Twitter generation. So I came up with this quote because this is kind of what resonated with me afterwards. If you can't text it or tweet it, they won't read it. So sending students these really long emails with all of this information, it's overwhelming. So if you can take it into bite-sized pieces, something that can fit in a text message or a tweet, that's more, kind of what they're looking for. One of the students said, well, I just want you to tell me exactly what I need to do when I need to do it. So we took that to heart. We took that back to the drawing board and said, okay, this is our current communication. We had communication set up to remind students to do their missing documents and everything like that. But we created a separate series that was more based on the calendar year. So if your verification deadline is July 1st, okay, great. We need, a week before that verification deadline, we need to blast to go out to students to say, hey, these are the verification documents you need to do by July 1st. We were having issues with, students not completing their MPN or entrance counseling. So, pick a day, August 1st, whatever day makes sense for you, whenever you're going to do your loan origination probably, and send out a communication right before that happens. You need students to set up a payment plan. Okay, what's the payment plan deadline? A couple weeks before that, let's send out a communication to remind students that, hey, maybe you want your parent to apply for a PLUS loan, or maybe you need to go on a payment plan. So having that timed communication that's more specific to those students was really key, because we did find then that, that really helped, that we did have more students, completing the MPN and entrance counseling up front, so that when it came time for disbursements, we could actually, disperse more of those loans. So, that's something that I would definitely recommend. The graduate students were more open to receiving emails than the traditional students, but have that kind of a focus group on your campus. I'm sure it kind of varies based on your geographic area, your student demographics. So doing a focus group and really understanding how to communicate with your students will help, with that whole flow, because if students don't do their part, then you're not able to do your job. So making sure that, your communication is effective is really a key part of this. Then results and metrics. So how do you measure success in your office? Have you given that any thought? What are your key metrics? How are you tracking them? So I would encourage you to spend some time with your VP, your president, your leadership team, whoever that is, and determine, how do you measure success? So maybe you have measures as an institution, but what about for the financial aid office? How is success measured for the financial aid office? Once you identify those metrics, start tracking them. I inherited an Excel spreadsheet when I first started as a director in one of my roles, that had just like a decade's worth of how many faxes were imported, how many students were file complete, and how many students were awarded, which was great information. So I was like, okay, well, this is great information. I'm just going to keep doing this. So I just kept adding to it. And I didn't know why. I didn't know what I was going to use it for. But it wasn't until, maybe a few months or even maybe a year later where I was thinking, man, we just seem really busy this year. Like, why are things so busy? And I realized even though the number of FAFSAs had stayed pretty constant, we had about the same number of applications year over year, but the rate of verification was just through the roof. And so that extra amount of verifications that you're doing is a lot of extra processing time for your office. It's often manual work. So, having some of those key metrics and having them tracked over time is really important to be able to measure kind of where you're at with things. And kind of like Susan was saying earlier, I mean, if you're able to document, this is where, we have that much more time that we now have to spend doing verifications. That's good data to have to take to, your manager or the president to say, this is why we're so busy. We need more staff. We need XYZ. We need these resources. So being able to track that is important. Another metric that we had tracked was SAP. So how many SAP warnings, SAP terminations, SAP appeals were coming in year over year. When COVID hit, that number also went through the roof. Students were struggling, and that was showing up in these SAP calculations. So being able to have that comparison data year over year, what was really helpful to say, okay, this is also creating more work for our office. We're working remote, we're as productive as we can be, but we've got this extra workload, between SAP appeals, HERF reporting. It was a challenge.
So we want to leave you today or summarize a lot of what we've gone over today with some actionable steps. We said that from the very beginning, we wanted to provide some helpful information that you can use. And some of this we've already touched on, but take time, invest the time. It's an investment in improvement. And again, I feel the eye rolls. I feel the angst when it's no one has the time. But if you can invest the time, carve out a little bit, particularly around annual setup, and figure out ways to make your system work better for you, it will save you in the long run. As Amy was saying, if you can schedule some processes, perhaps you can take some of the just clicking through the processes off of a staff person and make everyone's job a little bit easier. Perhaps you can untangle some of the knots around loan disbursements or document management. If you can use your document management and schedule email tracks, that will make your life easier. Then breaking it up in these smaller bite-sized emails will make it more successful, and it will have made that investment in time extremely worthwhile. Document as you go along. Record your staff meetings, document any new procedures. But what I'll also say is make sure you have a very clearly articulated method of saving your documents. When I stepped in here at Albany, I sort of was, it almost felt like I was at a rummage sale, digging through people's private drawers. I was finding private files and pictures and historical stuff from 2007. I mean, there's no way those procedures from 2007 are still valid. And it was pulling things from everywhere to try to figure out exactly where we are today. And so even if it's something as extreme and perhaps silly as writing a document on how to save documents, then do it, because you may not know what staff people will be in next year when it comes to annual setup. And so if you can have a standard way of naming every file, a standard location for saving every document, every procedural document, it will set up the entire team for success. Communicate that out with your entire staff So everybody who updates their own individual procedures can save it in one exact place with very clear and recognizable names to your files. So you can easily refer to them or send someone else to them in the future. Make sure you even tell someone. So if you don't meet virtually to record the meetings, if you're sitting around a table, ask someone to record the minutes to your meeting. I personally like to write every time I'm in a meeting. I keep notes in a book. And while I refer back to those all the time, I sometimes have a hard time understanding my own notes. So make sure someone is in charge of documenting your in-person meetings, and again, save it in a unified file so everyone can see exactly what happened. As Amy had talked about, meet with your team, invest in the people, see if you can make some minor adjustments to make their jobs more fulfilling. You know, we all have responsibilities that are tedious or that are not our favorite. And I'm old school enough that there's a part of me that says, but this is the job you were hired to do, and you knew the job description when you were hired for the position, right? But I have found so much more success leaning into individuals, leaning into those people, making sure they feel supported and making sure they feel heard, because it's going to be a lot better to retain your staff than to replace your staff. And so, you probably have a suspicion as to who might be looking for jobs elsewhere. And I would challenge you to lean into them. Of course, we want the best for our people. We want to see them thrive and grow within the industry. But if you can retain them, you're keeping really good people and knowledgeable people. And sometimes it just takes maybe some shifting around some responsibilities to keep them engaged in their position. And then know what your metrics are. As we've said, know what those key metrics are and track them at whatever structured intervals that you deem is appropriate. So you can present those to your leadership, you can present them to your board of trustees, whatever that success looks like. Shout it from the rooftops. Let the entire campus know what you all have accomplished. And that will help get campus-wide buy-in to how hard it is that we work. Make sure it's not just a matter of saying, gosh, we work too hard, but show them with the numbers and with the data.
Additional steps that we talked about, setting up those checks and balances within your system. So what are those things that end up as pain points at the end of the year? Find one or two of those things that you can really tackle throughout the year that might alleviate some of that pain at the end. Automating your daily processes, some of those more tedious processes. Check with your colleagues, check with your software provider, your IT staff, if you're not sure how that might be able to be automated. There's usually a way that you can, streamline that process or make it a little bit more automated. Determining how your students want to receive communication. So make your students on the same page with you, communicate with them so that they'll hear your message and take the action that you need them to take to make your job easier. Find your network. So as Susan said, this is so important. I found that other financial aid colleagues are often very easy to work with and very willing to, talk to you and bounce ideas off of. Even though the regulation, seems pretty cut and dry, there might be a nuance or an interpretation that you didn't catch when you read that regulation. So having those conversations with your colleagues, not only to, share your pain points, but to help each other and say, how did you interpret this? Because I interpreted it this way. It will really help you, kind of identify those gaps and maybe think about new ways of doing things that you weren't thinking of before. And, last but not least, don't neglect your training. So this is pretty critical, especially in, the environment that we're in right now with facing staffing shortages and things like that. The training is so important. So have your training, document the training. That will only benefit everybody in the long run.
And I'll add to that, Amy, real quickly. It's important not only training on your day-to-day within your own office for your own staff, but I know in moments where I've been short-staffed before, it's so easy to say, I don't have time to send people to the state association meeting. I'm short-staffed as it is, and then you want me to send 2 people to this 3-day conference. But it's those conferences when people sit around at lunch or sit around the vendor area, or a town hall kind of meeting. NASFA is this week. It's those moments where we connect with our peers and we hear the updated regulations. And 75% of you have said you're worried about administrative capability. So put your staff on it. Allow them to hear the information, or take time for yourself to make sure that you're hearing all of the latest. Things are about to change in a big way, and with need analysis and the FAFSA, and ultimately our job is to communicate that to students. And so while it's easy to say, gosh, I don't have time to go to that conference, do what you can to set aside the time, because our job is to make things better for the students, and that training will make a world of difference.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Amy. Great job. Currently no questions in the chat, so if anybody does have a question, feel free to come off of mute, or you could still type it in, and we'll stick around for some questions before we wrap up. So I'll give everyone a moment there.
While we're waiting, I'll just chime in that it's been pretty fantastic in 27 years of financial aid, to learn what the industry has to offer, to learn from our colleagues and our peers. Make sure you are plugged in. I will say to make sure you're plugged in. When I first started, and I will sound like an old lady here, but when I first started, that was back when you didn't have NASFA news coming into your inbox every day, or FSA partners. Become familiar with those resources, and carve out the time. It's so hard to carve out the time, but we have so many resources, and it can become overwhelming. But set up your morning, kind of calendar your time. If it takes you 30 minutes every morning, and you're fresher in the morning. My brain always works better first thing. By 5 o'clock, I'm sort of brain dead sometimes. So I like to say from 8 to 8:30, I'm going to read through all of those newsletters that come in, or do any research that I need to do. But have your routine. Make sure you utilize those resources. If your institution is not an ASFA member, it's okay. FSA Partners has all kinds of updates, and you can set yourself up for daily emails from them as well, with big updates that might be relevant to our positions. So that's just a plug, I guess, for using your resources. Perhaps your state association also has some kind of listserv. Make sure you're plugged in to those resources so you can be quickly alerted as things change.
Great, thanks, Susan. And I'll just add, if there is a need for outside vendor help, obviously Ferrilli is here. We provide it in many different capacities, whether it's interim staffing. So if you have that staff shortage and need a kind of temporary fill, we can help with that. We also have what we call core financial aid services, which is kind of more of an annual based contract that delivers services when needed through the year. As we know, financial aid is very cyclical. So that's also another offering, or just one-off projects. So we're here as a resource to help if that's a route you decide to go. And from a Ferrilli perspective, if you want to know any upcoming webinars or even our past recorded webinars, they are on our What's Happening page on our website. Additionally, you can also find where we will be from a conference perspective. So if there's any upcoming conferences Ferrilli will be at, they'll be posted there. So great page on our website to look at. And if you have any questions or comments or want to follow up after this call, you feel free to call us at our 888 line or info@ferrilli.com. Your account manager will be in touch with you as well if you, like I said, want to have a follow-up conversation one-on-one. And if there's a topic of interest that you'd like Ferrilli to present on in the future, we always ask our higher education partners to let us know if there's a hot topic, and we'll certainly put that in our webinar series.
And I will be at NASFA next week, so if anybody else is attending, feel free to reach out to me and we can hopefully link up at the conference.
Great. Well, I do not see any other chats in the messages in the chat. So we will conclude today, and again, appreciate everybody's attention, and thank you again. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.